court is now back in session. The chamber has just received a waiver from the accuser Nuon Chea, dated 11 February 2015, that due to his health, his wife is directly present in the courtroom, and that also is for the effective future participation in the trials, and that he requires to be present in the holding cell downstairs. And starting from this session until the end of the day. And based on this reason, and pursuant to Rule 81(3) of the internal rules, the chamber grants Nuon Chea's request so that he can follow the proceedings from the holding cell downstairs by an audio-visual means. And as he waives his direct presence in the courtroom, the AVA unit instructed to link the proceedings to the holding cell downstairs so that the accuser can follow it, and that apply for the remainder of today's proceedings. And the international lead co-lawyer for civil parties, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. A very short comment. And we would like this comment to be on the record. The civil parties have reminded how often that Nuon Chea appears physically, even if it's brief, in this courtroom. And we note today, and we would like this to be recorded on the record, that whilst Nuon Chea has chosen to be absent from the courtroom since the beginning of the trial, when witnesses and civil parties came to talk about the crimes they witnessed during Democratic Cambodia, Nuon Chea chose to be present today in the courtroom in order to be with you, Ms. Becker. And we noted that he sat during an entire session, and it seems important to us that this comment be in the record. And we are also surprised with the right to silence, the a la carte right to silence, whereas he had promised us at the beginning of the trial that he would participate in the hearings, and he systematically refused to answer the questions that were put to him by the civil parties. And we note today that he chose to break his right to remain silent to put questions to Ms. Becker, who is a kind of quote-unquote VIP. And here again, we would like this to be on the record of the proceedings. Thank you, Mr. President.
President, thank you. I think it is not appropriate for you to be on the record. As you are aware of, everything is on the record, on the transcript, and there is no need to emphasize that. The chamber would like now to give the floor to the defense team for Nuon Chea. And Counsel Visa, do you have any further questions? And if so, please try to avoid any repetitious questions. Counsel Sun Visa. Thank you, Mr. President, and I will rephrase my questions accordingly. And in fact, I only have 2 more questions for the expert. Madam Expert, during your visit, what were the roles of Von Wet and Son Sen?
Son Sen was military and Von Vet was industry, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, please.
Thank you. And my last question to you relates to Vietnam. Yesterday, you stated that Vietnam was present in Cambodia not for the humanitarian purpose. So, in your view, what was the intention of Vietnam being in Cambodia or being present in Cambodia at the time?
Thank you. The answer was regarding your co-defense lawyer's question about the invasion, and he asked if it was a humanitarian invasion, and I said no, it was an invasion as a result of the border war, that there were humanitarian consequences, but the invasion itself was not humanitarian.
Council Sumisa, thank you, Madam Expert and Mr. President. I don't have any further question. President, thank you. The Chamber would like now to give the floor to accused upon defense to put the questions to this expert. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Ms. Becker. My name is Anta Guissé, and I am the co-international counsel of Mr. Sampan. And I know that you speak French perfectly well, so I'm going to ask you to pay attention, as you did with Counsel Copet, to stop a bit so there's room for the translation. And I have a few follow-up questions and a few clarification questions in relation to your testimony. You indicated, Ms. Becker, that you were in Cambodia before 17 April 1975 and that you had stayed there for about 2 years. Did I understand well that it is in Cambodia that you started your career as a journalist?
Yes.
I also understood that you first worked for a magazine or review called the Far Eastern Economic Review. And as its name states, was this a review essentially focused on economic issues?
No, it was a Hong Kong-based news magazine, and the focus was closer to what we know as The Economist, where it has a strong economic component, but it has it's political as well. So you had the front part was largely the political issues, and in the back of the book, the back part was more economic business.
And if I understood well, you covered the war because you arrived in 1972. So this was really in the midst of the war, and you left in 1974. Is that the case? This was the first time that you came to Cambodia, between 72 and 74.
Yes.
So you always experienced Cambodia in times of war. You never were in Cambodia in times of peace, is that so?
Yes, the war was going on when I came.
I would like to know that if during that period you stayed in Phnom Penh, or if you had the opportunity to visit the provinces.
Yes, I traveled throughout Cambodia. The provinces, yes.
And when you say that you traveled throughout Cambodia, you also traveled to the combat areas.
Yes.
voudrais...
Now I would like to get back to your book, Les Larmes du Cambodge in French, in particular the excerpt. This is document E3/20. The French ERN is 00638 304. It's on page 17 in your English copy normally. The French ERN is 00638 304. In English, 00237722. And in Khmer, the ERN 0023202022. And you, in this passage that I would like to focus on, you speak about the consequences of the American bombings that we spoke about earlier, or that you spoke about earlier, and you say that the area of the rice fields fell from 3 million hectares to a bit more than 500,000 at the end of the bombing campaign. Free translation. The first question with regard to this excerpt, where did you get these? What was the source of these figures? Because I don't see any footnote.
The bombs are, the explosives of the bombs are through Freedom of Information Act, and it's now public record. And I believe the hectares and is from the World Bank, but this is my memory only. And I think that it may not be a footnote, but it's in the bibliography.
Thank you for this clarification. And now getting back to what you noticed when you traveled to the provinces, because you saw on first sight the destruction of these rice paddies and of these harvested areas. What did you see?
Are you talking about 1978 or during the war?
Non,
I'm still talking about the period prior to 1975, about your first stay in Cambodia.
Well, during the war, at the beginning, the bombardment was the very first half of 1973. So what you saw was clusters of destruction, and we would go and measure the bomb craters to verify that, in fact, these were B-52 bombings, because that was a critical question. We would interview refugees. We'd look at the destruction. We had, I remember going to one area, I think it was Kandal province, where I tried to figure out exactly how much acreage was destroyed. And the local leader and I walked through which families were gone, where they had fled, so on and so forth. And it was just simply going from one area to the other trying to do it, because it was a huge, as Mr. Nunchia was talking about, it was a huge issue in the United States. And the reporting was very important in terms of the attention of the U.S. public and the U.S. government on what was going on in Cambodia. So it was very much, those first 6 months was how much was destroyed through the bombing.
Now I'm going to move on to another topic, which relates, of course, to your work. You were questioned by Judge Lavergne the first day here with regard to an article called Wait Until the Movie. This is document E3/651, French ERN S00632-848, English S0007037, Khmer S00649994. And there is a term, a word that catches my interest in particular is when you speak about Pol Pot and you use this wording, the leader of the nation, Pol Pot, the leader of the nation. And this is an article dated 22 October 1977. And my question is connected to what you said about the Democratic Kampuchea regime, the fact that it was closed, that it did not communicate with the outside world. And we saw during the first trial that there were many facade positions and that Pol Pot's figure or position was not known to the world immediately. So you, who experienced Cambodia from 72 to 1974 and then who followed the events afterwards, I would like to know if you remember when you knew that Pol Pot was indeed the leader of the nation.
(1977). In just to go backwards, in 1974, I did a long piece for the Washington Post called "Who Are the Khmer Rouge?" And in that piece, identified a man named Salat Sar as the head of the party and the leader of the Khmer Rouge rebellion. And so since 74, I had printed that it's Salat Sar, but learning that his name was Pol Pot was 1977.
When you say that you learned that his real name, I heard you learned that his nickname was Pol Pot. Is that what you meant?
His nom de guerre, yeah. Yes. He was still Salat Sar. And if you remember, there was a publication issued in China, 1972-73, describing Grunk. And it was on the occasion of Prince Sihanouk's visit to the liberated zones of Cambodia. And Mr. Khieu Samphan was his host, the leader of the front. And if you keep going through the pages, there is Salat Sar and Mr. Nguyen Chia there. And the people who are watching how things go, that was sort of the beginning of, oh yeah, these are the two who are really in charge. And that was the beginning of tracing who would become the real rulers. And in fact, Pol Pot and Nguyen Chia became number one and number two.
So, getting back to your article from 1977, you said that the moment when the world discovered Pol Pot was not before 1977. So, do you remember when in 1977 Pol Pot was known?
The exact date, no.
We will get back to Pol Pot and to your interview with him in 1978 later, but now I would like to speak about another topic. Relations and of course we covered at length the relations between Cambodia and Vietnam already. But do we agree, or can we agree, that the problems between Vietnam and Cambodia did not start with Democratic Kampuchea, but that existed for a long time before?
Oh, yes. Historically, yes. And they continue today.
I'd like to go over again an excerpt from your book, E320 ERN in French, 00638-397. English, or for you, it's on page 124, 125. And the English ERN is 00237-829 over to 30. And in Khmer, 2 pages as well, 00232-165 to 166. And you speak about the Lon Nol regime, and this is what you say, free translation: at the beginning of April 1970, Lon Nol had ordered his men to set up detention camps for all Vietnamese citizens. The troops stopped the Vietnamese and put them in big abandoned buildings. A Cambodian woman remembers one of these horrible camps that was located close to where she was living. The soldiers took over an empty house by the temple and locked up the Vietnamese. They had nothing. They would sleep in hammocks. They would sit all day without doing anything within the camp. Lon Nol hated them. End of quote. Free translation. Can you tell the chamber the reason, if you remember, for these arrests in April 1970, the arrests of these Vietnamese by Lon Nol?
Well, the official was that they're worried that it's the traditional enemy. When Lon Nol was the military head under Prince Sihanouk, he implemented an agreement between Prince Sihanouk's government and Hanoi to allow North Vietnamese to transport a lot of materiel from Sihanoukville over to the eastern sanctuaries, eastern Cambodia sanctuaries. And when he was part of the coup d'etat against Sihanouk, he knew exactly where all those sanctuaries were, and within a few days he asked for the Vietnamese to leave. Didn't happen. And that's sort of the official, traditional enemy. Underneath it, there's a racial component that is just simply racism, where he took these Vietnamese who had nothing to do with North Vietnam or Hanoi or the South Vietnamese communists and used them as scapegoats, and eventually, as you know in this chapter, turned them into put them into camps, enemy of war camps, even though they had nothing to do with the war, and murdered them. And it was a pogrom.
Furthermore, and I continue quoting from the same page, this is what you wrote: the campaign grew into a pogrom. The government admitted to arresting some 30,000 Vietnamese and jailing 7,000 of them under suspicion of treason. They did not acknowledge the stories of racial murders that were reaching Phnom Penh. End of quote. It does reflect what you said. My follow-up question regarding that question and the fact that the Lon Nol regime was against the Vietnamese, it doesn't tally with the fact that Lon Nol was supported by the Americans, who also needed to hide the Vietnamese resistance positions on Cambodian territory.
On the contrary, it really infuriated the Americans because it upset the relationship with South Vietnam. If you remember, the United States, what the goal of the United States was to have an alliance between Phnom Penh and Saigon. And after the pogroms, there was a big uproar, and it took a while. I think, if I remember correctly, and I have to read it, I believe, in fact, Saigon blocked the Mekong after this because they were so furious.
This brings me precisely to a remark you made on the 9th of February, Monday at 10:56. We are talking of the later period. I'm talking of 1978 when you visited Cambodia. Regarding Vietnam, you explained that, and I will quote your exact words to simplify matters. I hope I'll find the transcript. You said at 10:56, after referring to the black paper and how you prepared for your trip in 1978, and you said the following: what was quite remarkable during that period was to see at what speed the former allies had become the enemy, and the language used was very strong. End of quote. My question regarding the context at the time, the first the Cold War period was not congenial to the change of alliances. You talked of a split between the Chinese and the Soviets. Did the situation not change on a daily basis depending on the tensions and the power balance during that period?
Well, I was not alone in yes, it was very quick, and that's why I said it was remarkable. And I think Malcolm Caldwell's comments throughout our trip reflected that. He was so taken aback by this. And it was clearly part of the Sino-Soviet split. Yes, no question. You're right.
And when you place this political problem and problem of alliances in line with what you have just described, the historic tensions between the two countries, is it as surprising as that, or it is something that you had not imagined would crop up during that period? That is, in the sense that the historical problems were current, and so it shouldn't have been as surprising as one would have expected.
I wish I'd been that brilliant, but I wasn't. When I wrote that first article I was talking about in 1974, I did write that despite what the United States policy was, there was clear evidence that there was tension between the Vietnamese communists and the Cambodian communists. But based on the fact that the Vietnamese Communist Army is in the first 2 to 3 years of the war, had taken the bulk of the fighting to defeat the Khmer Republic's army so that the Khmer Rouge forces could build up, arm, and so on and so forth, the equilibrium was very much in doubt. I'll refer to my colleague Nayan Chunda, as he wrote in his book, Brother Enemy, it still caught most of us by surprise.
Je voudrais revenir.
I would like us to revisit a passage from your book on the document E3/20. The ERN in French is 00638-548. The ERN in English is page 291, 0023799 I believe. And in Khmer, it is 00232-385. This is what you wrote. The Vietnamese threat was a creation of the Khmer Rouge. Disagreements and potential conflicts abounded between Phnom Penh and Hanoi. The two countries had yet to settle their 1975 border dispute that had led to the Mayaguez fiasco. Cambodia refused to entertain discussion or negotiations with the Vietnamese on their proposal to establish special relations between the two countries. But those problems might have simmered for years without bursting into a confrontation, end of quote. My first question to you will be asked after I will have shown you a document which was shown to you on the list that we had planned to show. With the authorization of the President and the Court greffier, it is a summary of a meeting of the Standing Committee. It is titled in French, Study of the Reaction of the Vietnamese during the 5th meeting of the morning of the 25th of May 1976. In French, the ERN is 00386175. In English, 00182693. I do not have the Khmer ERN, but it is E3221. I will give you the ERNs in the three languages. With your leave, Mr. President, I would like to show the document to the expert.
Yes, you can do so.
Pour information, Madame Becker,
For your information, Ms. Becker, the part I want you to look at is the part that is highlighted. For the parties, the part I will comment on is in English, and the ERN is 00182704, and it continues to 05. In Khmer, it is 00000, that's 5 zeros, 825 to 826, and in French, it is 00386 So it is a meeting of the Standing Committee, and the part I would like you to comment on and to read before you do so is the end of the statement by Comrade Secretary Pol Pot. In that passage, he refers to the border disputes with Vietnam and the discussions during negotiations that were underway at the time. This is what is written therein. Or this is what he says. Even though our positions may be different, in our opinion, our party will study, if our party could study the subject, it would enlighten us further. According to our experience, time has taught us to know ourselves and to be united. We will reach a solution. At this point in time, it appears impossible for us to find a solution. In reality, both of our parties, both our peoples are still united and agree with one another. The comrades have also said that Cambodia considers the issue of solidarity as a trick by Vietnam, whereas we consider Vietnam and the fruits of solidarity that bind us together as sacred. If we rely on this position, we are convinced that we will reach a solution. The obstacles that exist at this point in time are purely technical. If we were to base ourselves on politics and the spirit of solidarity and friendship and on mutual understanding, which have always existed between our two parties, we will certainly reach a solution to this conflict. We, for our part, we will reinforce and broaden our efforts further. A few concrete problems. We have considered all the problems raised. We will stop the conflict 500 meters from the border. We will try to do our best to avoid the conflict. We have refused at all costs, apart from that, to rely on the liaison committee to say that the enemy has engaged in actions. Sometimes enemies create problems to destroy our negotiations. That was Pol Pot speaking. And now Comrade Nguyen speaks and says the following. The possibility is that they will not yet go. They Lampa in June. They will want the month of June. Therefore, until there's some concession, only when they first accept our conditions will there be negotiations. Then Comrade Van makes a statement. They use absolute words saying they won't accept the Brevier line, but after a long while, they may perhaps accept this Brevier line, end of quote. The first part was a free translation. So, according to the negotiations with the Vietnamese, they made reference to the Brevier line. Can you briefly explain what was the problem between the two countries with regard to the Brevier line?
The Brevier line is the maritime line, and the Vietnamese objected that it was a French colonial division and did not represent what they considered their territory.
Et est-ce que nous sommes d'accord pour dire
Are we agreed that on the border, the main bone of contention was the Brevier line?
In these discussions, but eventually the conflict is much more on land.
ce document et cette discussion?
This document and the discussions date back to May 1976. I'll now look at the last paragraph of that of the document, and this is Comrade Secretary speaking. So we act gentle. We go watch their movie. They were going to watch it with the Vietnamese comrades. They do not yet have any reason to break off from us because we'll keep smiling freshly and have never cursed them. If they break it off, they gain nothing, they only lose. End of quote. In May 1976, apparently, and this transpires from the negotiations, it would appear that this was also the position of Democratic Cambodia. They wanted to pursue dialogue and to avoid a deterioration in the situation that would culminate in conflict. So we see here a trend, an evolution in the situation. Do you know why that was the case?
That they went from trying to find a resolution, a non-violent resolution in Brevier, to a land conflict. Using the documents, it's because they started to see Vietnamese very separate from this border issue as interfering in their internal life and accusing many members of Democratic Cambodia of being agents for Vietnam.
On va revenir.
We will revisit this issue somewhat later in my questioning and in line with the discussions you had with Pol Pot and Ieng Sary. But before we get there, I would like us to look at the way you prepared for your trip in 1978 and what you refer to as interviews you had with American officials. During the hearing, you talked of American officials generally. At least that is what we gathered from the French. I would like to read out to you an extract of your book to place things in context. The document is, the ERN is 00638-654. The ERN in English is, and for you, I'm sorry I do not have the exact page in your book. It's perhaps in English 00238-115, and the ERN in Khmer is 00232-533, and it continues to 533. 434. The English page for your book is 402, page 402. This is the extract from your book regarding interviews you had before your trip. And this is what you said. Dutman and I had been briefed on the tenuous situation confronting Cambodia before we arrived. I had talked to experts at the American government's State Department, Defense Department, and the Central Intelligence Agency in Washington. In Bangkok and in Beijing, I had met with political and military experts of the United States, France, Canada, Australia, Sweden, and China. Not one had predicted a full-scale war between Vietnam and Cambodia. At most, these experts said the Vietnamese would push to the Mekong River and stop there, satisfied to control the East Bank before pressing on to the capital in a later offensive. One of America's leading Cambodian experts, an old friend, told me in Bangkok that fears I expressed about the rumors of war and my own safety were unwarranted. It will be a piece of cake, he said. End of quote. First of all, first question. As part of your trips abroad, was it frequent for you as a journalist to have talks with officials of the State Department, the Defense Department, and the CIA?
Excuse me. In this situation, it's not always no, but in this situation, because first of all, my newspaper was worried about my safety, and we were going someplace strange. I did go the extra mile and talk to them. And of course, what's not in here too is I obviously had to go to see the Chinese in order to get my visa. But they did not give me any briefing whatsoever. It was just to visit.
Et quand vous dites que...
And when you said that you were briefed by them, was that in response to your request for an interview, or your newspaper arranged all these interviews with the various officials?
Oh no, the newspaper. As a journalist, you call the press spokesman and say, "I need a background briefing on safety and security in Cambodia," and that's what I did.
Alors, forcément...
Well, the question that arises is that the State Department, the Defense Department, the CIA, the Chinese, no one predicted the way things were going to turn out. When you arrived in Cambodia, you must have asked yourself, why didn't you not predict all this? Why didn't you have information? Or did you have question marks as to why this attack occurred, why it had not been predicted by anyone? Why did they not give you information on such an eventuality?
No one had a presence in the country. This is one of the reasons why I was trying to find out what I could, but I knew no one had a presence in the country. France didn't have a presence in the country. Australia, it was largely, fibrous reports and so on and so forth. The United States didn't have a presence in Vietnam either. So it was a shot in the dark. There's no question. And was I, of course I was upset that what happened. But no, I mean, I knew that there was, as I said many times, this was self-isolated country.
En français, je l'ai compris.
I understood from what you said that there was no presence in Vietnam, no French presence in Vietnam. Do you mean that there was absolutely no means of obtaining information regarding Vietnam?
There was no American presence in Vietnam.
Dans ces conditions,
Under those circumstances, without any American presence in Vietnam, on what basis were the CIA, the Defense Department, and the State Department so sure that they could tell you that you shouldn't fear for your safety? There were no sources of information to rely on. There was no basis. Why then did they say that you didn't have to fear anything? They must have received information from somewhere. Where were they getting this information from?
That was exactly my question. So how could you reassure me? And they said because they have looked at all of the friendly delegation visits and they were treated extremely well, and that I would be treated just as well as the friendly delegations.
d'accord, donc si je comprends
Very well. So if I understand you correctly, the reassurances were based on treatment you would receive in Cambodia, but regarding conflicts with Vietnam, you did not receive any information from them.
I'll say it again. These were their estimates, and as you know, the United States shares military intelligence with many countries, and they said, based on the best information, this would not happen. That's their best. They did not assure me that it wouldn't happen, but they said, based on the best information, it would not happen. That's it.
D'accord.
Very well. We will revisit this issue somewhat later regarding the information you received from Pol Pot and Ieng Sary on the situation with Vietnam during that stay in Cambodia. But before we take the lunch break, I would like to elicit your comments on the notes. You wrote document E3/1171, and it has to do with your meeting at the end of your trip to Kampuncham and your meeting with PIN. In French, the ERN is as follows: 00764-039, and the first passage in English is 00087-878, and in Khmer it is 00726-606. The passage or the notes that you took during that trip have the following exhibit numbers in English: 000-87858. It's written at the top of the page to the left. Let me repeat it again: 000-87858. And this is what you wrote in those notes. MidPin offers us a, in quote, warm welcome. He is a member of the command of National Road 7 at Suong. And this is what you said, and I believe that's why you are quoting them. Please specify whether when you place remarks in quotes, you mean that these are your remarks as opposed to those of others.
No, it's those of others. It's not me, it's those of others.
Entre parenthèses, donc.
In quotes, I read the following: they came within 2 kilometers of here. In parentheses, Viets. They came to Mimot. End of quote. So when you write Viets in parentheses, you mean that is someone else who said that, or you meant to say that they spoke Vietnamese?
The quotation is from Mit Pin, and it's me telling myself that the they refers to Viets.
D'accord, donc on est d'accord que
Very well. I take it therefore that what is in parentheses is your own remarks. Let me continue the quotation. They launched an attack. We concentrated on them. They went back. Then 2 or 3 days later, they came back. We carried out guerrilla war, the Vietnamese regular war, in parentheses, obviously political, ideological purity in guerrilla, end of parentheses. The Vietnamese relied on planes, tanks. They used heavy artillery and infantry, in parentheses. This is what happened within that week, end of quote. My first question is as follows. When you say that is what happened that week, is that something you witnessed, or it was Pin who related to you what had happened that week? Did you personally witness the use of heavy artillery and infantry on the part of the Vietnamese?
This is what Pin told me.
deuxième extrait.
Second excerpt on the following page in English, there, ERNs therefore 000-72660 read in Khmer, sorry. You refer again to Pin, and Pin explains, or he speaks to you about the offensive. And this is what he tells you. Free translation. The offensive started in July and in August and has continued practically since, but it's at much lower intensity than in 1977. In September, they penetrated the Mimut area, constant attacks, and increased attacks in July, August, September, and November. The most intensive bombardments in July, August. The usage of planes shows the weakness of the Vietnamese. The 250-liter bombs, SIC, use a blue-colored gas. No victims due to the gas, but people have headaches and they vomit and they suffer from dizziness. End of quote. Here again, I understand that it is he who is speaking to you about these attacks. So you, in what you witnessed during your visit to the border, did you see remnants of such attacks, heavy artillery attacks in this area? And when he told you that people were suffering from headaches and dizziness and were vomiting, did you connect this with a kind of gas that you might have seen since you were a war correspondent and you had followed fighting previously? So these are two questions in one, in fact.
The only thing I witnessed was in the far distance in a clear exchange of artillery fire, and that was simply because of the sound and the smoke. I witnessed nothing else. And during the war, I did not witness any gas, but I certainly heard of it. There was definitely, and I took photographs of this, signs of destruction of buildings. Not a lot, but and I think the court has some of these photographs. I gave them to the court.
Mr. President, I have finished with this line of questioning, and I see that it's time for the adjournment, so...
President, thank you, Defense Counsel. The time is now appropriate for our lunch break. We'll take a break now for lunch and return at 1:30 this afternoon. Court officer, please assist the expert during the lunch break and have her return to the courtroom at 1:30 this afternoon, and security guard Joan Sati to take a kiss and pawn to the waiting room downstairs and have him return to the courtroom this afternoon before 1:30. The court is now in recess.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ